and look at what's going on within the mind. It's really very powerful and it's very freeing. And sometimes we don't know that we have a mind, right? Because we're so fused, we're so identified with them. And that's where the contraction comes. That's where we aren't able to meet life with this spacious, open heart or open mind. So this was my path when I first started. Before practicing mindfulness, it was very difficult to even be aware that I was caught up in worry, anxiety, or sadness. Much time was spent ruminating over things that I couldn't control. This patterned way of thinking was like a blanket I carried with me everywhere. It gave me a false sense of power, like I could keep the worry at bay when all I was doing was spinning in it, and it was exhausting. So there was no peaceful place to rest because the worry was always playing out scenarios of loss and catastrophe waiting to happen. Yet deep within, there was a knowing that there was another way to live life that wasn't based on a logic or if onlys or luck or any of that. It was just a deep knowing that all this living with a fixed view about the way life shouldn't be was misleading and toxic. It wasn't until I began to learn and practice mindfulness that I really understood and experienced a taste of freedom from getting hooked in the thoughts and stories created by the untrained mind. And it isn't that I don't get caught in the swirl of thoughts. The difference now is that I can sense, feel, and recognize when I'm caught in an unwholesome pattern of thinking. Practicing mindfulness helped me to come back home to the body and to the heart that helps us come back to the present and find our way back to compassion, kindness of the heart. It is a path that helps us to come back into connection, loving, and nourishing. Living mindfully is an invitation to connect beyond the world of thinking. We shift our attention from the thought to attune to what is happening in our body, mind, and heart as the process of thinking is happening. This is a radical approach and takes practice. In the beginning, shifting from thinking to the breath can be seen as a mini vacation from the constant outflow of thoughts. Break can be like the clouds shifting to allow the sun or clear blue sky to be seen. Clarity, a moment of being present with the way life is. So does that resonate? Yeah. Yeah. But in the beginning, it could be that we touch of pausing and being with the breath and we're gone again. You know, the clouds, it's like the clouds come and they cover over the sun and you're back in that kind of, sometimes as if it's what I call a tornado or a storm. It could also be that you're thinking about something that you're excited about, and so you're off in fantasy land. So it's not necessarily that we're caught in negative thoughts. It could also be that we're caught in thoughts of the future, anticipating something that's going to happen. All of it, there could be some excitement and there could also be some fear there as well. Of making ourselves wrong for that, because that's really what I did in the beginning. Like, why do I I'm not a good meditator, I'll never be able to do this. It was more the patience, of learning something new, learning to be with life in a different way, to trust in the practice and to be able to stay even when the mind would go off, to normalize that that's what the mind will do. I don't know where I heard this, but it was recently. I think it was yesterday that I heard say that the mind, oh, it was Donald Rothberg, who's a Dharma teacher, and he was giving a talk. And he said that the mind doesn't like consciousness. It likes routines, but it doesn't like, like really being present. So I found that to be really interesting. And why is that? I think it's because routines give us a sense of safety. Even if those routines are not what we know how to do. And our biggest fear is the not knowing. So, so a couple of stories that I'll tell. In Tara Brach's book on radical acceptance, she tells a story about when the pilots were first going up and breaking the sound barrier, and would get past the Earth's atmosphere controls crazy, and they couldn't control the plane, so they would start freaking out, and they would be screaming to the control tower, "Help me! Tell me what to do! I can't control the plane!" And they would end up crashing to Earth and dying. So Chuck Yeager went up, and this time when he went up, turbulence of the plane, he got knocked out. He got knocked unconscious. And he came to consciousness once he re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. That he was able to take control of the plane. So what's the lesson there? It's that we're trying to control things. A lot of times we're trying to control them through our thoughts. And it's the actual letting go that allows, for things to settle, and then for us to have wisdom about how to proceed. But that managing or manipulating or trying to get things to be a certain way or running away from things. I mean, we have so many different ways that we're in some way caught up in a story, and then we're not present. We're not connected to that wisdom. We're not connected to the power of the, that can see the suffering and can respond to it. And I love that story because I think it's so true of the way that we live our lives. She also has a phrase she uses that we live our lives in the control tower, try to manage everything. And a lot of times things don't need to be managed, they just need to be experienced. So I say we're always trying to tweak things, even if we have done as much as we can, that's that we feel is negative and we're reacting to it in that way. We're trying to get it to go away from happening. Sometimes we actually make it happen. And what I mean by that is, if I think somebody's going to get upset, so I have that's like a seed that's planted in my mind, and then my body follows. I get contracted, and the anxiety's there, and and so when I get to the person, maybe the story, I've had the argument in my head already, and to the person, and I say, "Okay, already, don't get mad at me. This is just what I did, or whatever it is." How many times do we have like imaginary conversations in our head with people that things that never happened, and we're reacting to them as if they're real? So this is a way of really beginning to free the energy from being caught in a story of something that hasn't happened. Really fascinating how powerful the mind is. You can look at it and see that even in those stories, there is this way in which the mind is very, very powerful. So wouldn't you want to train something that's so powerful, right? Yeah. So story from I'm gonna Sakni Rinpoche. And he's talking about, he was one of the first ones to coin that phrase, real but not true. So this is his story. It's like fear, anger, or jealousy come up. It's very hard to resist giving up and giving into them. And I just want to say that the strong emotions start with the thoughts, right? So it could be the emotion that comes first or the thought that comes first, but they're enmeshed. For example, several years ago, I was traveling on a very small airplane, Khara, one of the lowland regions in central Nepal, a remote site high in the Himalayas. I was traveling to oversee the rebuilding of a Buddhist nunnery there, which had fallen into disrepair. I was supposed to depart at 8 a.m. in order to avoid the high winds that almost always develop later in the day. But in those days, airplane travel in Nepal was an uncertain prospect at best, and planes often departed hours later. Eventually, we left the airport 3.5 hours after the plane was scheduled to depart, and long after the winds had begun to blow. As we flew between two huge mountains, our tiny plane was buffeted up and down by turbulence for almost half an hour. That's a pretty long time. A few other passengers on board were screaming and crying, sure they were going to die. I applied a little method I hoped might steady me a bit. Instead of focusing on the movement of the plane, I looked out the window and focused on one of the mountains. But I must admit, I was infected by the same fear that gripped the other passengers. Although we landed safely, I prayed that there might be another way to get back to Pokhara by car or bus. But the only route in those days was flying. Trip, crammed in the same small plane with foreign tourists, I sweated so badly my robes began to get wet. The armrest tightly, and though doing so made me feel a little better, a part of me knew that no matter how tightly I clutched, it wasn't going to help if the plane really crashed. The fear I felt on that return trip, however, and the fear I felt for many years later, even when I was traveling on large commercial airliners, was real. So the fear is real. The feeling, right? In the sense that I was fully experiencing it. However, as I looked back on each subsequent experience, I had to admit that it wasn't true. That is, it wasn't grounded in actual present circumstances, but instead was triggered by residual memories of a past experience. This sort of experience in which fear or some other strong emotion arises in a context that doesn't necessarily warrant such a reaction, or perhaps to a degree that isn't warranted by the actual circumstances, that I've learned to engage in with myself. Yes, what you're feeling is real. I recognize and honor that, but this fear is not based on true conditions. Over the years, I've shortened this conversation to a kind of mantra. And mantras are just phrases that you use that help you to stay present. It's a sort of prayer or invocation that helps to open our being to a deeper connection to possibilities beyond our immediate conceptualization. In my own case, I use 4 words, and the 4 words are real, but not true. So what would it be like to, when you're caught in a story, to be able to break the spell of the trance, right, of being caught in the story making mind? So that there is the opportunity to liberate ourselves from being caught in our habitual stories, because the other thing is that a lot of times they're not new stories. It may be new experiences that we're being exposed to or encountering in life, but the feeling and the route that we take, the path that we take when that happens, is usually the same. And I see this in a very vivid way. I see this when I'm working with couples. Bill gets paid late. The partner doesn't do what they said they were going to do. And the story that goes off for the other partner is the same exact thing. And then from there, the judgment starts. And then from there, it's, reliving every single time this happened before. And the despair and the anxiety and the anger and all of it. And so you could see there's not a whole lot of wisdom there because of being caught up in trying to fight off something that is being created by the mind. And I'm not saying that there's no validity in that story, but it's been kind of exaggerated, blown up. And it's almost like in that moment we're imprisoned in the past, and there isn't, again, it's kind of dead space, right? Because your thoughts aren't vibrant. You can't feel the heartbeat, you can't feel the pulse, you can't feel the breath. When you're caught up in a story, it's just this kind of, it's a way of trying to help ourselves. Help, it just leads to more Buddha talked about. It's that second arrow that we're shooting into ourselves. So if you remember the story of the two arrows, the first arrow is the arrow of pain, the pain of life, trigger, and then the second arrow is whatever we're layering onto that, the judgment, the beliefs, the stories, all of it. And it's funny because when I meet with clients, this is a story that I use with them about the two arrows. And I remember one of my clients saying, I could see in real time what was happening. He said something happened. He got triggered by someone, a customer. And he said the story took off. And he said, and I could feel the first arrow, the pain. He said, I felt it here, like this contraction, this constriction. And then he said, and man, I just couldn't stop it. I just was like shooting arrow after arrow into my foot. You could picture it. He said at some point, he could see it happening, but it was very hard to pull back, right? But at some point he was able to see that he was doing it, and then it was like taking a breath, regrounding himself, coming back. As you begin to develop that skill, it gets stronger and stronger. So there isn't going down the path, and it's a day later that you realize you were stuck in a story. So there's a freedom of that, the freedom of coming back. And that's the beauty, the being able to come back, the being able to connect with the breath, the being able to tend to the body. That's the healing part. Tara Brach also says we suffer from homesickness. And that makes sense to me. We're not, when we're caught up in limiting beliefs or stories about how the world needs to be, how our life needs to be, how others need to be, we can't respond. And we're not connected to our likeness. And life is precious, if you really think about it. So what are we connecting with when we're on this path? And really it's this awareness, this non-judgmental awareness that is able to see what is happening really is without layering all of the judgments and beliefs and all of that. And you can close your eyes as you listen to this, taking in the words. Awareness. Her gaze is so constant. Our every move watched. Action. A ceaseless vigil without condition or agenda. Patient, unrelenting in her embrace. There is endless room in the heart of this lover. Infinite space for whatever foolishness we may toss her way. But she is also crafty, a thief who will steal away everything we ever cherished, all our beliefs, all our ideas, all our philosophies, until nothing is left but her shimmering wakefulness, this simple love for what is. And I say, what a gift. I'll open it for questions or comments.
Well, that story being played, what do you do?
So this is part of what we'll do in the guided meditation, but what's happening in your body when you have that story going? If you can think of a particular story.
Oh yeah, I know what happens. I'm aware of the whole thing. It's not pleasant.
So what happens when it's not pleasant? Where does your attention? So where does your attention go?
You want to turn it off, but there's no switch.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
So the practice is one of turning towards the suffering and investigating it, rather than trying to escape it. Because the trying to escape it, that's the movement of increasing the suffering. And going back to the story, right? It shouldn't be here. And have happened if,
Well, I tried that Vietnamese. I always mispronounce it. Yeah. I tried to do hi there, that sort of thing. It doesn't work.
Right. So part of it is just letting go of trying to manage what's arising and learn how to just be with it without reacting to it, and beginning to shift your attention from the thoughts or the concepts to what's happening in the body. So it might be that you notice there's a tightness in your chest or in your shoulders, and you take a breath and you come back to the body and you stay with what's happening here, because that is happening in real time. The story, whatever story you have in your mind, it's not happening. You know, something may have happened, but all the things that you're telling yourself about what happened, you know, it's all fabricated.
There is you just remind yourself, I go through all that, and I analyze it, and I say, here we go. All this, and you see what you did to yourself? You had to go ahead and do this. Now what do you do? And what I found is it doesn't last as long.
Mm-hmm.
I'm finding it just goes away.
Right. Right. So that's the beauty of the practice, right? That you can.
Well, I think it's because of the practice. It's just, I have taken notice that when I go through this routine, saying, look what you're doing, you know, all that kind of thing. Not even talking to anyone. There's nobody here. You told me yourself. I find that it takes less time for it to go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm assuming it's from the practice that's taking place.
If you really look at this practice, and it's about changing the way you're relating to whatever's arising. So, because if you think about it, the way that we relate is, you know, we have that negativity bias that I've talked about in the past. The brain has this tilt towards the negative. And so the practice is one that helps us to see when that's happening. Right? And part of the practice is shifting the attention from being caught in the thought where, you know, it's just a thought, you can't really do anything. Like in the story of Rinpoche, when he was on that plane, no matter how tightly he clutched the armrest, he went safely, right? So that's the thought, right? I'm gripping this and hoping that in some way this is going to safely, and the ability to see that that's, you know, that's just a thought. And then being able to attend to what's happening here, right? The fear, to be with the fear, to feel it in the body. Initially, very much the opposite of what we want to do. It's counterintuitive. The defenses say, don't do that. The defenses say, do something, right? And whether it's freeze, and it's a way of trying to escape what's unpleasant in the moment. So if you think about it, we go through this kind of, I call it a ping pong. You know, this is unpleasant, I don't want it. This is pleasant, I want more of that. So it's a state of unrest, a state of unease, and you can feel it in the body, you can feel it in the heart and in the mind. And when we have, I say that really start to use this practice with the small moments where you're having a thought and you're able to work it there much more successfully than when the big ones come. Right? Could be that, you know, you start to notice that you're judging. Go around and notice what the internal dialogue is like when you're getting triggered by somebody. Someone cuts you off on the road. What's the belief that comes up and that follows? What happens in the body? What happens to the breath? There's many different ways to practice. But we use the physical body, the breath, the sensations to come back home. Because if we stay caught up in the story, then anyone else?
My question is about the phrase real but not true.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know exactly how to apply it. Real but not true. I mean, let's say I'm worried, well, maybe not even worried, thinking about somebody who's unwell and alone. Honestly, I'm not worrying. I'm just thinking. Or is it that you have to be in a negative state for something to be? I'm just not sure. If I'm thinking about something, a place I've seen and I remember it with pleasure. Real but not true.
Mm-hmm.
When does it apply? I just want a good example of something that's real but not true.
it's so more than anything, it's you're having a thought. Let's say you're thinking about someone who's unwell, and that's a thought, right? The thought arises in the mind. You know, you have an image of the person. Maybe it's to turn. The thought is real, right? But in that moment, maybe you're thinking, "Oh my goodness, they're sick," and you know, there's sadness there, or whatever it is. To begin to turn the attention towards what's happening in the body in that moment. Okay. And because then maybe, like for example, I like Gil Fronsdale because he's a great teacher and very experienced, and he talks about how the mind will just kind of drift off. And he talks about being in meditation, and you're sitting there, you're breathing, and then you start thinking about throat this morning, and maybe you're sick, and maybe you should go to the urgent care after you get out of meditation hall, and and then you think about your friend who's in the hospital and how sick they are, and pretty soon you're so many miles away from here. So the thoughts are real, right? They're happening.
Things are not true.
Right. But the stories, the fabrications are not. Yeah.
At the beginning, you said something that I think really addresses this, though, which is that the discriminating variable is, does it lead to suffering?
It doesn't mean that, okay, so you're thinking about your friend who is unwell. So the thinking is real. The not true part is that she's still unwell. That's not the untrue part. The untrue part is that you're not here where she's at, or you're not tending to her, or you're not, you're here. And so you cannot be here and here at the same time. And therefore you're negating, when you're here, then you're negating the real actual reality that you're driving.
Oh, okay.
Or you're here
Yeah.
in this meeting, or
Her circumstances are real.
her circumstances,
Yeah.
right. But your circumstances are also real.
But
And so which one are you negating? So when you're like,
Well, yeah. So more than anything, again, I say that it's because if we start trying to break it down and like begin to analyze it too much, then we lose sight of the practice of just, like how can we come back and be present? Like in the story of Gil sitting and meditating, and pretty soon, he's in the hospital room with his friend, even though he's in the meditation hall meditating. So it is just turning the attention back here, which is not usually what we do.
Another thing is that those thoughts can't, especially if it's about the past, you can't change it.
Right.
You can't affect it at all.
Mhm.
It's almost silly to even go through this. I mean, you have to just let it go.
Right. So part of it is also knowing that the mind's tendency is to go into the past to try to figure out how to deal with what's happening in the present. And that's part of the defenses, right? That if, that's how we learn to survive, is by storing memories of what happened in the past and then being able to attend to it. If you think, I'm talking our ancestors, way back on the savannah, and you gotta know what to do in that moment, right?
But isn't it all also kind of, when you get into that place, it's you trying to use the past to predict the future, and therefore you're getting out of the present?
Yes.
Like, if I do this, then
Sometimes.
this won't happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's trying to avoid your forecasting in the future,
And you're
or
leaving this part out now.
meaning
the present.
Right.
The present, yeah.
So then the coming back is
Yeah.
really important, right?
Yeah.
That's the present.
Yeah.
It's coming back. Yes.
What I notice when I'm driving and I'm having real conversations with people in my head, I'm arguing with them, I'm fighting with them. And then all of a sudden another person comes in, join the conversation. And all of a sudden I'm still driving. And you know what's funny? It's like this is the mindful part that I realized in the rearview mirror, and I look back and there's nobody. That's my moment when I realized I'm missing the fact that they're not here.
Right.
They're real in my head, but it's not true. They're not in the back of my car.
Right.
But all of a sudden there were 20 of them, or
Right.
2 or 1 of them.
I've done that, and when I figure out what I'm doing, I am miles past
Right,
the exit test.
right. And so what I try to do is I try to,
So,
when I
so
see
staying
myself
here.
thinking too much,
Yeah.
I try to anchor myself with something physical of mind, my
That's-
body, connect with.
So
Yeah.
it's best to come back to present.
Right.
Because present anchors us.
Right.
Yes. And that's where we can wake up out of
Focus.
that, you
Out
know.
of that state.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like a bad dream, almost like
Right.
that.
Well, not labeling it bad or
Or,
good. It's,
right. Or indifferent
Right.
dream.
Or whatever. It's just, this is what's happening right
Right.
now. So there's the knowing quality of awareness in that poem that I read. That really was what that was about. That awareness can see what's really happening. And, you know, in that poem that she's a thief, you know, she's going to steal our beliefs, our ideas, our conceptualizations, and what we're left with is just the shimmering realness of what's happening, the real, you know, reality of life, right? So I could be at a retreat, but in my mind, I'm gnawing on some problem that's back home or at work. And then the moment that I wake up out of that, or there's that moment of mindfulness, I'm sitting here on retreat. That's a moment of waking up and being back in the present. So taking that in and then, okay.
That made me think of the fact that the more I started paying attention to the thoughts, the more I realized that they really tend to cluster into very predictable food a lot, right? And or I'm thinking about this person a lot. And so it's like your relationship with something kind of weights your tendency to go to those types of thoughts.
Yes, yeah. So we'll probably next week I'll talk about papancha, which is what you're talking about. So how to work with that. So I think this is a good place to stop and to meditate. You're welcome. Thank you everyone for your participation. So if you would find a nice tall spine. And as you take a breath in to really feel the ground beneath you, the weight of the body, and the points of contact between your body and the floor. See if you can sit in a way where the crown of the head is moving up towards the ceiling. The shoulders are relaxing down away from the ears, perhaps slightly back so the heart is open. Chin is parallel to the earth. And the hands resting in the lap. And begin by feeling the breath coming into the body. The space on the in-breath in the chest and the belly. As the chest rises, belly rises. And as you breathe out, the letting go, the emptying out. Allow yourself to connect with that rhythmic grounding breath. The in-breath creating space. And on the out-breath, allowing whatever possible to relax around the core of the spine. Keep the spine alert. So this presence, wakeful presence, you might scan through your body and see if there's some way that you can set your body and then entering into the world of your breathing, into the way your body experiences breathing. For now, letting go of your thoughts and concerns. And sensing the experience of breathing. Noticing how inhalation, then the exhalation. Letting the thoughts recede to the background. And in the foreground of attention, you are with your breathing. Breathing in, breathing out. Giving yourself over to your breathing so that the breathing has a chance to settle you, to calm. If you notice yourself thinking for the next couple of minutes, let go of that and reestablish yourself in the breathing. Breathing in, feeling the breath come into the body, the space, the openness. Breathing out, letting go on the out breath. And if you notice the mind wandering, gently, kindly shift your attention back to the sensation of breathing. And now, with a certain degree of calm and deliberateness, let go of your breathing. Let go of paying attention to breathing. And simply notice when you're thinking. You're welcome to think. But then, as you're thinking, you're clearly aware that thinking is happening. So, looking at your thoughts directly. If thoughts fade away as you watch them, wait until they come back. Or go back to the breathing until such a time as thinking begins again. When it does, clearly look at your thinking. See that it's happening. And very, very softly, whisper in the mind as you're aware of thinking occurring. Or name it, thinking. Thinking. Very softly. And for the purposes of meditation, what you're thinking about isn't important. But as we pay attention to thinking, you might notice other aspects of the process besides the content. So, for example, if you're thinking words or images, what's the quality of the inner voice? What's the quality of the pictures you see? The inner voice that thinks, is it soft and gentle? Is it harsh, adamant? Is there a lot of energy to think? Or is thinking very subtle? Are there any emotions connected to what you're thinking about? If there is, quietly note the emotion and include that in the awareness. And then as you notice your thinking, notice if there's a physical side to thinking. Is there any pressure or tension connected to thinking or in the body? Tightness, pressure in the brain, in the forehead, perhaps tension around the eyes or the jaw, holding in the shoulders or the chest. Is there some part of the body that feels activated in support of thinking, as part of thinking? And then is it possible to relax or soften any tension or pressure connected to thinking? Perhaps as you exhale, relaxing the thinking brain, like you'd relax a muscle. And now can you let go of your thinking enough to recenter yourself, letting go of your thoughts, allowing them to recede to the background and enter the world of breathing again, hanging in there with the breathing. And see if you can stay connected to a whole series of breaths in a row, staying present with the experience of breathing. May this practice serve to awaken our hearts and minds and be of benefit to ourselves and all beings everywhere. Thank you, everyone.